The Judicial Conduct Tribunal that's probing sexual harassment allegations against Eastern Cape top Judge Selby Mbenenge will be back in session at the end of next month. The recess was to essentially allow to give his legal team time to prepare for the testimony of a gender expert who was called at the request of evidence leader Advocate Salome Scheepers. Judge Secretary Andiswa Mengo claims Mbenenge made unwanted advances towards her between June of 2021 and November the following year. The expert has been called upon to speak about the power imbalances that may have been at play between the top judge and the junior staffer. Let's speak more about this with gender activist Asanda Ngoasheng, who's with us now via our video link. Great to see you as always, Asanda. Thanks for making time. Interestingly enough, we're told Mbenenge's legal team had pushed back against this proposal, citing, amongst others, a lack of relevance, which is important, I suppose, to try and unpack, because I don't think often there's an intersectional kind of approach to such issues like this, where we need to consider who people are and perhaps what power they bring into any kind of exchange.
Yeah, I think, we live in this world where we don't often interrogate patriarchy and the impact of patriarchy in people's lives. So the things that women are allowed to do, the ways in which women are expected to behave, and the difference between that and how men are expected to behave are things that determine what society deems as socially acceptable behavior and behavior that is not socially acceptable. And so what this case has brought to my mind is that, we need to have more conversations about what is acceptable behavior in the workplace and the ways in which power itself takes place and is used and exercised in the workplace. Because you must remember that we come, and I'm old enough to have lived through this era, we come from an era where if a man was interested in a woman, or a boy was interested in a girl, they would even do things like twist your hand or insist that you talk to them even if you don't want to talk to them. And we are far from that era, but there are a lot of people who still believe that those are the ways and who still behave in those ways, whether it's in the workplace or out of the workplace. And we need to challenge those societal norms. We need to challenge those patriarchal standards that say a man has the power to want a woman and to do what they want with the woman, and all a woman needs to be doing is just agreeing and following their orders and instructions.
The complexity, of course, is that power shifts in different scenarios. And with that in mind, I wonder what the approach you reckon should be here, if in fact this gender expert's evidence is going to hold, if it's going to be relevant for this particular hearing.
Well, I think the gender expert, expertise or contribution should be relevant and should be important, because at the crux of this case and at the crux of all cases that have to do with sexual harassment and impropriety in the workplace is whether the person who was in power used their power over the person who was not in power to get the person who was in power to do what they want. And often there's a complication in these cases, which is that sometimes you find that people did agree to go into a relationship with the person who was their boss, but at some point started not being comfortable with the relationship. And often when the woman decides that they want to stop and no longer be in this relationship, if the man decides the relationship is not over, then they will continue to act as if they were not told that the relationship is over. And then when people hear about that, they then sometimes will judge the woman harshly to say, why were you in a relationship with this person in the first place? Why were you flirting with this person in the first place? Forgetting that the first ethical breach was by the person who was the boss and therefore had power over the person who was an employee and therefore had less power. And I want to emphasize that, in the legal sector, what has been described as happening is a very familiar experience for many women. Young women, I've done workshops where young women said that, it isn't just about the abuse that they experience from the principals who they work with. It's also about women in law firms being told that they have to do whatever is required to get the business. And so when young women as lawyers, as legal aides, or anybody that's in the legal system are dealing with potential clients, sometimes they're made to go to dinner to entertain the client, even if the client makes them feel uncomfortable. And these would be instructions coming from their bosses. And I know of women who have quit the law completely because they felt they couldn't constantly put themselves in these positions that they felt were dangerous to them and that they felt infringed on their very rights to choose who they associate with, choose how they spend their time, and choose who they engage with, and be able to exercise their boundaries around what people are able to say, do, and engage with around them.
Yeah. I imagine whatever kind of form this particular testimony is going to take, it can't avoid questions around agency. And I suppose you've touched on that to some extent, questions around why you don't leave the moment you feel uncomfortable or why you don't speak soon enough.
Yes, I mean, this is an age-old argument that people use. Why are you only coming out now? Why didn't you speak at the beginning of this? And often these questions misunderstand or deliberately misinterpret, I would say, the fact that when you are in a position where you don't have power and you have somebody, you must remember that when somebody is your employer, they don't just have power to hire and fire you. They pay your salary and determine whether you will get paid in time or not, because they determine whether the person who runs the payroll runs your payroll or not. They determine whether you're going to get a bonus or not. They determine whether you're going to get a promotion or not. And so not agreeing to do what they want you to do has very negative implications, not only on your immediate financial circumstances and livelihood, but also on your career. Because what often happens, and we've seen right now, there's a case of a young associate who has taken somebody on to court for racism, who is an older gentleman. And one of the biggest issues is that what then happens is your name as a person who complains, as a woman who complains in particular, you then become blacklisted in the industry because the legal industry and many other industries are small and all of the big players know each other. And so if you call them out, you will suffer the consequences in terms of your career. And I can tell you now that the complainant in this case is likely to find themselves needing to go to a different industry because of the furor around this case and because she dared to challenge a person who is in power and she dared to expose the rot that exists in the entire legal system, whether we're talking about the government side of it or the private sector side. And a lot of people are in shock about what's happening because they haven't had interactions with the legal system. Unfortunately, there's an assumption that because it's the legal system and the very people who are under question mark are the ones who are meant to uphold human rights, who are meant to follow the letter of the law, they're shocked. But the truth is, we saw, for instance, with a judge who was driving drunk and then denied it and was so arrogant in their response, we saw that often the people who are charged with upholding the law are the ones who break the law the most, are the ones who care less about the law, because it is their own friends who are going to be charged with judging whether there was a breach of ethics or not. And so it makes this case even more difficult for this particular woman because it is, it's accusations against a powerful man in the law that will be judged by powerful people in the law who are potentially their friends and colleagues and people that, who have known each other for a long time.
Yeah, Asanda Ngoasheng, not one to pull any punches. Thanks very much indeed for helping us think through some of these things, and we'll have to see, of course, how the hearing unfolds. Asanda Ngoasheng speaking to us there in a capacity as a gender activist.